The stars had been quiet for too long. Commander Zix-9 stood in the control room of his massive ship, watching the empty space through the metal windows. His forearms moved slowly as he checked the computer screens. The Vorak Empire had ruled the galaxy for 3,000 years. They were always hungry for more worlds to conquer. Zix-9 was 9 ft tall like all Vorthach warriors. His body was covered in hard, shiny armor that grew from his skin. Sharp teeth filled his mouth and his eyes could see in the dark. His claws were as long as human fingers and twice as sharp. He had destroyed 47 worlds in his lifetime, and today he would add another one. The ship's computer beeped softly. "Commander, we have found a new target," said his second officer, clicking his words. The harsh Vorthach language. "Its third planet in the system shows signs of life." Zix-9 moved to the main screen. The planet was blue and green, spinning slowly in the darkness. Small lights dotted its surface where cities might be. The scans showed millions of life forms moving around on the surface. These creatures walked on two legs and seemed to have basic technology. "What do we know about them?" Kixin asked, his voice deep and threatening. "They call themselves humans. They have been using fire for about 100,000 years. They discovered electricity recently. They have split the atom but barely understand space travel. They fight each other in small wars but have never faced a real enemy." Zixin made a sound that might have been laughter. "Perfect. Another world of weak prey. How many ships do they have in space?" "None that could threaten us, Commander. Few small stations and some metal objects that float around their planet. Nothing with real weapons." Commander looked at the planet again. "It would be easy, like all the others. K would land, kill the strongest fighters, and take the rest as slaves. Some worlds tried to fight back, but it never mattered. The Vorth were perfect hunters, created by millions of years of evolution to be the strongest, fastest, and most dangerous creatures in the galaxy. Send the hunting parties." Zix-9 ordered. "Standard protocol. Bind their military bases first, then their cities. We want them scared before we land." Across the galaxy, the Vorth had conquered over 800 worlds. Every species they met was the same: weak, frightened, and unable to fight back against real predators. Some had better weapons than others, but none had the killer instinct that made the Vorth so successful. The Vorth fought like the hunters they were. They moved fast, struck hard, and never showed mercy. Their enemies always broke and ran, making them easy to catch. It was the natural way of things. The strong ate the weak, and the Vorak were the strongest of all. On Earth, Lieutenant Ryan Murphy sat in front of his computer screen at Peterson Space Base in Colorado. The numbers on his screen didn't make sense. 24 objects had appeared at the edge of the solar system, moving in perfect formation toward Earth. They were too big to be asteroids and too organized to be natural. "Colonel Hayes," Ryan called to his commanding officer, "you need to see this." Colonel Lisa Hayes walked over to Ryan's desk. She was a career military officer who had spent 20 years preparing for threats that might never come. Today, it looked like all her training would be put to the test. "What am I looking at?" Murphy. "Unknown objects." "Ma'am, they appeared 2 hours ago and they're heading straight for us. They're not responding to any of our radio calls." Lisa looked at the screen. Objects were massive, each one the size of a small city. They moved too fast for any human technology she knew about. Get me the Pentagon now. Similar scenes played out at military bases around the world. In Russia, China, Britain, and every other nation with space monitoring equipment, officers stared at their screens in growing fear. Humanity was about to meet its first real alien visitors. They were not coming in peace. The Vorthat dropships entered Earth's atmosphere like burning meteors. Each ship carried 50 warriors, enough to take control of a major city. They landed in New York, London, Tokyo, Moscow, and a dozen other population centers around the globe. The first ship touched down in Central Park. The metal doors opened with a hiss, and the Vorthach warriors stepped out into the sunlight. They moved like giant insects, their heads turning to scan for threats. Their weapons hummed with energy that could cut through steel. Police Sergeant Tony Rodriguez was the first human to see them up close. He had been patrolling near the park when the ship landed. Now he crouched behind his police car, speaking into his radio with shaking hands. Dispatch, this is Rodriguez. I need backup at Central Park. I don't know what we have. You're not human. They're big, maybe 9 ft tall, and they have weapons I've never seen before. Copy that, Rodriguez. Backup is on the way. Backup wouldn't be enough. The fourth warrior that approached Rodriguez's position moved with liquid grace when the sergeant tried to fire his pistol. The bullets bounced off the creature's natural armor like raindrops. The warrior's forearms moved in perfect coordination, one holding a weapon, the others ready to grab and tear. Rodriguez ran. He had been a cop for 15 years, but he had never faced anything like this. The creature followed him easily, almost playing with him. This was what they Vorthach did best. They hunted and they enjoyed it. Around the world, similar scenes played out. In London, British soldiers tried to set up a defense around Parliament. Their rifles and machine guns did nothing against the Vorthach armor. In Tokyo, the Japanese military brought tanks, but the alien weapons cut through them like paper. Vorth moved through the cities like they owned them. They killed anyone who tried to fight back and captured others to study. They had done this hundreds of times before on hundreds of worlds. Earth was just another hunting ground. But something was different about the humans. On other worlds, the local species would surrender after the first attack. It would hide or run or beg for mercy. The humans did something else. They kept fighting. In New York, a group of police officers set up a roadblock. Using their cars, they knew their weapons couldn't hurt the aliens, but they stood their ground anyway. When the Vorthach attacked, the humans didn't run. They fought back with everything they had, even when it was hopeless. Vorth warrior leading the attack stopped for a moment, confused. Why weren't these creatures running? Didn't they understand that they were prey? The same thing happened in cities around the world. Human soldiers, police officers, and ordinary citizens fought back even when they knew they couldn't win. They used everything they could find as weapons: baseball bats, kitchen knives, even their bare hands. Most of them died, but they died fighting. This was not normal. In 3,000 years of conquest, the Vorthach had never encountered prey that acted like this. Other species fought back at first, but they always broke when they realized how outmatched they were. The humans seemed to get angrier the more hopeless their situation became, Commander Zix-9 read the reports from his hunting parties. With growing confusion, the humans were fighting back harder than expected, but they were still losing. The strain behavior would not change the outcome. Earth would fall like all the others. Sir, his communications officer reported, we're receiving messages from the planet's surface. The humans are trying to surrender. Zixin felt satisfied. Finally, these strange creatures were learning their place. What are their terms? That's the problem, sir. They're not offering to surrender. They're demanding that we leave. The commander stared at the officer. They're demanding, yes, sir, they say. They will fight us until we leave or until they are all dead. They refuse to be taken as slaves. Zix-SN had never heard of such a thing. Prey didn't make demands. Prey submitted or died. These humans were acting like they thought they were predators too. Double the hunting parties, he ordered. What happens when prey refuses to know its place? But as the reports continued to come in, Zixin began to wonder if perhaps the humans were more dangerous than they appeared. They had lost every battle so far, but they had not lost their will to fight. In fact, they seemed to be getting better at it. For the first time in his long career, Commander X9 began to feel something he had never experienced before: uncertainty. The humans were still weak, still primitive, but they were not acting like any prey species he had ever encountered. They were acting like they had nothing to lose, and that made them very dangerous. Indeed, 3 weeks had passed since the Vorthech first landed on Earth. Commander Zixin had expected the planet to be fully conquered by now, but the reports from his hunting parties told a different story. The humans were still fighting, and worse, they were learning. Captain Jake Morrison crouched behind a pile of broken concrete in what used to be downtown Chicago. His squad of 12 Marines was hidden in the ruins of buildings that had been destroyed in the first wave of attacks. They'd been fighting for 3 weeks straight, and every day they got a little bit better at staying alive. Listen up, Morrison whispered to his team. We've been watching these things for weeks now. They're strong and they're fast, but they fight like animals, big cats going after deer. Expect us to run, and when we don't, they get confused. Sergeant Kate Williams nodded from her position behind a burned-out car. She had been a Marine for 8 years, but nothing had prepared her for this. What's the plan? Sir, same as always. We hit them hard and fast, then we disappear before they can hit back. Remember, aim for the joints where their armor connects. That's where they're soft. The Marines had learned this lesson the hard way. In the first week of fighting, they had wasted thousands of bullets shooting at the thick armor that covered most of the Vorthach body. It wasn't until a lucky shot hit one of the creatures in the armpit that they realized the aliens had weak spots. Morrison checked his watch. Movement in 30 seconds. Williams, you're on the detonator. Everyone else, pick your targets and wait for my signal. The Vorak patrol consisted of 6 warriors moving through the destroyed streets. They walked in a line, confident and relaxed. In 3,000 years of conquest, they had never needed to worry about ambushes from prey species. Today, they were about to learn why that was a mistake. Williams pressed the button. The explosion rocked the street, sending chunks of concrete flying in all directions. The blast didn't kill the Vorthach, but it knocked them down and filled the air With dust and smoke, for a few precious seconds the aliens couldn't see what was happening. Now Morrison shouted, 12. Marines opened fire at the same time. It practiced this drill hundreds of times. And now it showed. Every bullet was aimed at the joints and soft spots they had identified. The fourth tried to get up, but they were taking damage in places they had never been hurt before. The largest warrior roared in pain and anger. It had been shot in the shoulder joint, and its left arm hung uselessly at its side. For the first time in its life, it felt something that its species had never experienced: fear. Fall back, Morrison ordered. The Marines disappeared into the ruins as quickly as they had appeared. By the time the surviving Voroth got to their feet, the humans were gone. Similar scenes were playing out all over the world. In London, British soldiers had learned to use the city's old subway tunnels to move unseen. In Tokyo, Japanese forces had turned the dense urban environment into a maze of traps and ambushes. In Moscow, Russian troops had discovered that the Vorthach didn't see well in the snow. The aliens were still winning most of the battles, but they were no longer winning all of them. More importantly, they were starting to take casualties. Real casualties. Warriors who had survived hundreds of battles on dozens of worlds were dying on Earth. Dr. Ellen Roberts worked in her makeshift laboratory in the basement of a destroyed hospital. She had been studying pieces of Vorthach armor and weapons that the resistance fighters had brought her. What she found was both encouraging and terrifying. They're not gods, she said to Colonel Peter Collins, who had come to check on her progress. They're just really good at what they do. Her technology is advanced, but it's simple. They don't need complicated weapons because they never fought anyone who could fight back. Collins was the highest-ranking military officer left alive in the Chicago area. He had set up a command post in an abandoned subway station where he coordinated the resistance efforts. What does that mean for us? It means they're not used to adapting. They have one way of fighting and they're very good at it, but if we can force them to change, they might not know how. Doctor showed Collins a piece of Vorth armor she had been examining. Look at this. It's incredibly strong, but it's also heavy. They can wear it because they're so much stronger than us, but it slows them down. Odd in a long fight. That could be an advantage for us. Collins studied the alien metal. Can we make weapons that will penetrate it? Maybe. I'm working on it. There's something else. I've been studying their behavior, and I think they're starting to change their tactics. They're moving in smaller groups now, and they're being more careful. This was true. That Vorthach had started the invasion with large hunting parties that moved openly through the cities. Now they traveled in pairs or alone, always watching for signs of human ambushes. They had learned to fear the shadows where humans might be hiding. The change was most obvious in Detroit, where the resistance had organized the most effective defense. The Vorthach had expected to take the city in a few hours, but they had been fighting there for 2 weeks. Humans had turned every building into a fortress and every street into a battlefield. Lieutenant Commander Amy Foster was in charge of the Detroit defense. She had been a Navy officer before the invasion, but now she commanded a mixed force of soldiers, police officers, and armed civilians. They had one advantage over the aliens. They knew the city better. than any outsider could. "Units, this is Foster," she said into her radio. "We have 6 Vortho moving down Michigan Avenue. Teams 3 and 7 get into position. Everyone else stand by." The battle that followed lasted for hours. The Vorth tried to advance through the city center, but every building held human defenders. Every window could hide a sniper. Every doorway could conceal a bomb. The aliens found themselves fighting an enemy that was everywhere and nowhere at the same time. When it was over, the 4 of the 6 Vorthach were dead. The other 2 had retreated, carrying wounds that would take weeks to heal. It was the first time in recorded history that Vorthach warriors had been forced to retreat from a battle. The news spread quickly through the human resistance networks. The aliens could be beaten. They could be killed, and most importantly, they could be made to run away. Commander Zixon read the casualty reports with growing alarm. In 3 weeks of fighting, he had lost more warriors than he had in the previous 50 years combined. The humans were supposed to be weak, but they were fighting like creatures that had nothing to lose. His communications officer reported, "We're receiving a message from the human resistance." "What do they want?" "They're demanding that we leave their planet immediately. They say if we don't, they'll kill every Vorthach on Earth." Zix-9 felt something he had never experienced before, anger mixed with fear. These creatures were making demands again, but this time they might actually be able to carry them out. "What are their numbers?" "Unknown, sir. They seem to be everywhere. Every city, every town, every piece of countryside. They're not just soldiers anymore. The entire species is fighting us." This was the most disturbing news of all. On other worlds, the Vorthach had fought armies and governments. On Earth, they were fighting an entire species that had united against them. Men, women, and even children were joining the resistance. In New York, a group of teenagers had learned to make bombs from household chemicals. In Los Angeles, elderly people were serving as spotters and messengers. In small towns across America, farmers were setting traps for Vorthach hunting parties. Humans had done something no other species had ever done. They had turned their entire planet into a weapon, sir. The communications officer continued. "There's something else. The humans are requesting help from other species. They're broadcasting messages to the entire galaxy." Zix-9 felt a chill run through his armored body. If other species learned that the Vorthach could be beaten, it might inspire them to rebel. The empire that had taken 3,000 years to build could collapse in a matter of months. "Block all communications from the planet," he ordered. "Nothing gets in or out." It was too late. The messages had already been sent, and across the galaxy, enslaved species were beginning to ask themselves a dangerous question. If humans could fight back, why couldn't they? The war was far from over, but something fundamental had changed. The Vorthach were no longer the unstoppable force they had been for 3 millennia. They were now an army under siege, fighting an enemy that refused to surrender and seemed to get stronger with every passing day. For the first time in their history, the galaxy's apex predators were learning what it felt like to be afraid. The message from the Vorthach High Command reached Earth 2 months after the invasion began. Grand Admiral Dexpram, the most feared warrior in the galaxy, was coming with a fleet of 300 ships. His orders were Simple. If the humans would not surrender, would be completely destroyed. President Helen Martinez read the intercepted message in her bunker. Deep beneath the Rocky Mountains, the United States government had moved here after Washington was attacked, but they were still functioning. More importantly, they were now working with every other government on Earth. How long do we have? She asked General Peter Collins, who had been promoted to head of the New Earth Defense Force. 2 weeks, maybe 3. The aliens are bringing enough ships to turn our planet into glass, Collins replied, but we're not the same species they invaded 2 months ago. This was true. The humans had spent every day since the invasion learning how to fight. Every factory that survived the attacks had been converted to making weapons. Every scientist who was still alive was working on ways to kill Vorthech. Every person who could hold a gun was training to use it. Dr. Ellen Roberts had made the breakthrough they needed. Working with captured Vorthech technology, she had developed new weapons that could pierce alien armor. The first test happened in the ruins of Phoenix, where a squad of Marines faced a Vorth hunting party. Sergeant Mike Chen led his team through the destroyed streets. Each Marine carried a new rifle that fired specially designed bullets. They had trained for weeks with these weapons, but today would be the first real test. Contact front, Chen whispered into his radio. 3 Vorth moving in standard formation. They don't know we have new toys. The battle lasted 30 seconds. The new bullets went through Vorth armor like it was made of paper. Aliens died before they understood what had killed them. For the first time since the invasion began, humans had won a straight fight against their enemies. The news spread around the world, and hours the resistance networks buzzed with excitement. The Vorth could be killed easily now, and every human fighter wanted to try the new weapons. But the aliens were learning too. Commander Zix-9 had received reports about human weapons becoming more effective. He ordered his warriors to change their tactics again. Instead of hunting in the open, they would strike from hiding and disappear quickly. New strategy worked at first. Warriors began attacking supply convoys and small groups of humans before vanishing into the ruins. They were adapting to fight more like the humans did, and it was effective. Captain Sandra Wells discovered this during a patrol outside Melbourne. Her unit was escorting a convoy of supplies when the Vorthech attacked from 3 different directions. At once the aliens had learned to use ambush tactics, and they were deadly good at it. They're fighting like us now, Wells reported to her commanders. They're not just big, scary monsters anymore. They're becoming real soldiers. This worried the human leadership. If the Vorthech could adapt and learn, they might be able to overcome the new human weapons. The war was becoming more complex every day. The situation changed completely when Admiral Robert Clark received a message from space. The first human ship to leave Earth's orbit in over a century was returning, and it carried news that changed everything, sir. The ship's captain reported, "We found something. Vor have a supply station in the asteroid belt. It's not heavily defended, and it's full of the materials they need to keep fighting." Clark studied the intelligence reports. The aliens needed supplies just like humans did. Their weapons required special materials to function, and their armor needed regular maintenance. If the humans could cut off Those supplies the Vorth would become much weaker. How many ships do we have that can reach the asteroid belt? Clark asked. 12, sir. All of them are modified civilian vessels with military weapons. They're not much, but they might be enough. The human fleet that launched from Earth was tiny compared to the Vorthach forces, but it represented something important. Humanity was taking the fight to the enemy instead of just defending their home world. The battle for the supply station lasted 6 hours. The Vorthach defenders were caught completely off guard. They had never faced an enemy that could attack their supply lines. The station was destroyed, and its loss would Vorthach operations for weeks. But the real victory was psychological. The aliens had always been the ones who attacked first, who chose when and where to fight. Now the humans were doing the same thing to them. Commander X9 received the news of the supply station's destruction with growing panic. The humans were not just defending anymore. Screwed. They were attacking, and they were doing it effectively. How is this possible? He demanded. These creatures barely knew how to fly before we arrived. They learned very quickly, sir, his aide reported. Every day they get better at fighting us. Some of our warriors are saying they're more dangerous than any enemy we've ever faced. Was the truth that the Vorth were slowly beginning to understand. They had awakened something in humanity that was far more dangerous than they had realized. The humans were not just fighting for survival anymore. They were fighting to win. The change was most obvious in the space battle that followed. Grand Admiral Vexprim arrived with his massive fleet, expecting to find a broken world ready to surrender. Instead, he found human ships rising from the planet to meet him. The human fleet was small and poorly equipped compared to the Vorth Armada, but they fought with a coordination that surprised the aliens. Every human ship knew exactly what to do, and they worked together like parts of a single machine. Admiral Clark commanded the human fleet from the bridge of the newly built ship Defender. The vessel was a mix of human engineering and captured Vorthach technology, but it represented something the aliens had never seen: a species that could adapt and improve faster than they could. All ships. This is Clark. He announced they're coming in the same formation they've used for thousands of years. They never learned to chain because they never had to. Let's teach them about innovation. The battle was desperate and violent. The humans lost ship after ship, but they kept fighting. More importantly, they kept learning. Every attack taught them something new about their enemy, and they used that knowledge immediately. The Vorthach, meanwhile, were confused and frightened. They had never fought an enemy that could match their technology. It never faced creatures that refused to give up, no matter how hopeless the situation became. When the battle ended, both fleets were badly damaged, but the humans had achieved something incredible. They had fought the galaxy's most powerful military force to a standstill. The Vorthach fleet retreated to regroup, but they were no longer sure they could win. Grand Admiral Dex Prime stared at the damage reports in disbelief. Half his fleet was gone, and the other half was too damaged to continue fighting. Humans had done something no species had ever accomplished. They had beaten the Vorthach in open combat. How? He asked his officers. How did they do this? Fight differently than other species. One of his commanders replied, they don't just try to survive, they try to win, and they're willing to die to make it happen. This was the lesson that the Vorthach were learning too late. They had spent 3,000 years hunting prey that wanted to live. Now they faced an enemy that was willing to die to protect what they loved. The war was far from over, but the balance had shifted permanently. The Vorak were no longer the unstoppable force they had been for millennia. They were now an army that could be beaten. And every species in the galaxy was beginning to realize it. On Earth, the human resistance celebrated their victory in space, but they knew the real war was just beginning. The Vorthach would not give up. The next phase of the conflict would be even more dangerous. However, something fundamental had changed. The humans were no longer just surviving, they were winning. And they were teaching the galaxy that even the most dangerous predators could be brought down by creatures that refused to be prey. The age of Vorthach dominance was ending, and humanity was leading the way to something new. The retreat of Grand Admiral Vex Prime's fleet marked the beginning of something the galaxy had never seen before. For the first time in 3,000 years, the Vor were running from their prey, but humanity had learned something important. During their months of fighting, they were very good at hunting. Admiral Robert Clark stood on the bridge of the Retribution, the newest ship in humanity's growing fleet. The vessel was built using both human engineering and captured Vorthach technology, but it was designed for something the aliens had never mastered: coordinated warfare. Admiral Weave tracked the Vorth fleet to the Kepler system, reported Commander Bate Parker. Our scouts confirmed they're trying to repair their ships at a supply station. There, Clark smiled grimly. The Vorak had made a critical mistake. They were trying to run from an enemy that had just learned how to chase them across the galaxy. Said, of course, for Kepler, it's time these creatures learned what it feels like to be hunted. The human fleet that jumped into hyperspace was small but deadly. Every ship was crewed by people who had spent months learning to fight an enemy that seemed impossible to beat. Now they were taking that knowledge to the stars. Captain Jeff Morrison commanded the destroyer Vengeance as it followed the flagship toward enemy territory. His crew had trained for this moment, the chance to fight the Vorth in space where both sides were equal. Vor fleet detected, reported Lieutenant Sarah Davis. They're in defensive positions around the supply station. It looks like they're expecting us. Good, Morrison replied. Let them expect us. They've never fought an enemy that could follow them home. The battle that followed was unlike anything the galaxy had seen. The Vorthach, so confident in their superiority, had never developed advanced space combat tactics. They fought like hunters, relying on fear and overwhelming force, but humans fought like soldiers with coordination, planning, and the ability to adapt quickly. Within hours, the Vorthach's supply station was destroyed. The surviving alien ships fled deeper into space, but they carried with them something their species had never experienced: the knowledge that they were no longer safe anywhere. The news spread quickly through the galaxy. The Vorthach Empire, which had seemed unstoppable for 3 millennia, was being beaten by a species that had barely learned to fly across hundreds of worlds. Enslaved species began to whisper about hope. Dr. Maria Rodriguez worked in her laboratory aboard the human ship Discovery, studying captured Vorthach prisoners, what she had learned, was changing everything humanity thought. They knew about their enemy, they're not military in the way we understand it. She reported to the fleet commanders. They're hunters who grew too successful. They've conquered the galaxy, but they've never fought a real war. This revelation explained everything. The Vorach had overwhelming individual strength and advanced technology, but they had never learned to work together. On a large scale, they hunted in packs. They didn't fight as armies. General Patricia Collins received the reports from her command center on Luna Base, humanity's first military installation. Off Earth, the base had been built in just 3 months using captured alien technology, but it served as proof that humans could build faster than the Vorthach could destroy. They've been hunting for 3,000 years, Collins said to her staff, but they've never been hunted by anything that could fight back. We're about to change that. The campaign that followed was unlike anything in galactic history. Human forces began striking at Vorthach installations across multiple star systems. Each attack was carefully planned to cause maximum damage, while avoiding direct confrontation with large enemy forces. The Vorthach were confused and frightened. They had never faced an enemy that could appear anywhere, strike hard and disappear before they could respond. This was how they had always fought, but now it was being used against them. Colonel Danny Martinez led the first human ground assault on a Vorthach world. His Marines landed on the third moon of Vorthach Prime, where the aliens had built a massive prison camp. The facility held thousands of prisoners from dozens of different species. Remember, Martinez told his troops as they prepared to attack, these things have been hunters for thousands of years, but they've never been hunted by humans. Show them what that means. The assault was devastating. The Vor guards, expecting to face cowering prisoners, instead found themselves fighting professional soldiers who had been trained specifically to kill them. The prison camp fell in less than 6 hours. But the real impact was not military. As the human forces freed the prisoners, word spread across the galaxy that the Vorthach could be defeated. Species that had given up hope began to plan their own rebellions. The psychological effect on the Vorthach was immediate. For the first time in their history, they began to experience something their victims had felt for millennia: the constant fear of being hunted. Commander Zixnan, the same officer who had led the first attack on Earth, now found himself commanding the last Free Vorth fleet. His forces were a shadow of their former strength, constantly moving to avoid human hunters. Sir, human ships detected on long-range sensors, reported his navigation officer. They are moving to intercept us. Zixstein studied the tactical display with growing despair. Human ships moved with purpose and coordination, and his species had never achieved. They were not just hunting. They were herding his fleet toward a trap. How many ships? He asked. 12. Sir, but they're working together like a single organism. Our scouts report. They've been tracking us for days. This was the new reality for the Vorthach. They were no longer the hunters. They were the hunted, and their pursuers were better at hunting than they had ever been. The battle that followed was swift and decisive. The human fleet, though smaller, fought with tactics the Vorthach had never seen. They used their ships like tools, one serving a specific purpose in a larger plan. Captain Jennifer Walsh commanded the cruiser triumph as it led the attack on the Vorth flagship her crew had trained for months for this moment, the chance to face the species that had tried to exterminate humanity, all weapons target. Their command section, Walsh ordered. Let's finish this, the Vorth flagship, built to intimidate and overwhelm, couldn't match a human vessel designed for warfare. The alien ship was destroyed in minutes, and with it died the last organized Vorthach resistance. In that sector, the news of the victory reached Earth within hours. Humanity had gone from being prey to being the galaxy's most effective predators in less than a year, but they had learned something important. Being a predator was not the same as being a monster. President Helen Martinez addressed the world from her bunker, her words broadcast to every human settlement. The galaxy, we have shown the universe that no species has the right to prey on others. We will not become what we fought against. This was the crucial difference between humans and Vorthach. The aliens had conquered because they enjoyed hunting. Humans fought because they refused to be hunted. The Vorth who survived the human counterattack found themselves scattered across the galaxy. Leaderless and afraid, many surrendered to the species they had once enslaved. Others tried to hide in the deep space between stars, but they all carried the same message. Humanity was coming, and no corner of the galaxy was safe from their reach. The species that had entered the galactic stage as potential prey had become its most effective hunters, but unlike the Vorthach, they hunted with a purpose to ensure that no species would ever again have to live in fear of being someone else's prey. The age of the Vorthach was ending, and humanity was writing the rules for what would come next. They had learned to be predators, but they had chosen to be protectors. The galaxy would never be the same. The message arrived at the human fleet 6 months after the last major battle came from Grand Admiral Dexprim himself, transmitted from the deepest part of Vorth. For the first time in their 30,000 history, the Vorthach were asking for peace. Admiral Robert Clark read the message aloud to his staff aboard the Retribution. The words were simple but carried enormous weight. We request terms for ending hostilities. We offer to withdraw from human space and return to our original territories. The human officers looked at each other in silence. A year ago they would have accepted such terms immediately. They understood that showing mercy to predators only encouraged them to hunt again. Send our response, Clark ordered. Complete surrender of all Vorthach forces, or we continue hunting them until none remain. The message that went back to the Vorthach was clear and final. Humanity had learned the most important lesson of warfare when fighting monsters. You must be more dangerous than they are. Grand Admiral Dex Prime received the human response with something his species had never felt before. Despair. The creatures they had dismissed as weak prey had become the galaxy's most effective killers. Now they were demanding unconditional surrender. What are your orders, sir? Asked his aide, one of the few Vorach officers still alive. Vexprim looked out at the stars through his ship's window. His empire was gone, his fleets destroyed, his people scattered. The humans had hunted them across the galaxy with ruthless efficiency. Send word to all remaining Vorthach forces, he said quietly. We surrender. The surrender ceremony took place on Earth in the ruins of New York City, where the war had begun. representatives from dozens of species came to witness the event. The galaxy's former apex predators knelt before the species they had tried to exterminate. Commander Zixon, now the highest ranking Vorthech officer still alive, stood before Admiral Clark in the human leadership. His armor was cracked and his spirit broken. The confident hunter who had first attacked Earth was gone, replaced by a creature who had learned what it meant to be prey. The Vorthech Empire formally surrenders to the human Federation, Zixon said, his voice barely above a whisper. And GT, we submit to your judgment. Clark looked down at the alien commander with no satisfaction, only sadness. The Vorok Empire is dissolved, conquered. Territories will be returned to their original inhabitants. All prison camps will be opened immediately. Your fleet will be destroyed under human supervision. The terms were harsh but necessary. The galaxy had suffered under Vorthech rule for 3 millennia. Justice demanded that their victims be freed and their ability to harm others be removed forever. But then came the question that would define the future. What would happen to the Vorthech themselves? President Helen Martinez addressed the gathering from her podium, her words carried to every corner of the galaxy. We have learned that strength is not about being the biggest predator. Real strength comes from protecting those who cannot protect themselves. The decision that followed surprised everyone, including many humans. The Vorthech would not be exterminated. Instead, they would be integrated into galactic society under strict supervision. They would learn to be something they had never been before, members of a community rather than solitary hunters. Dr. Ellen Roberts, now serving as Earth's first director of galactic relations, established the rehabilitation programs. The Vorthoks spent millions of years evolving to be perfect predators, she explained to the other species representatives. But evolution can work both ways. They can learn to be something different. The process was not easy. Many Vorot could not adapt to their new reality. Some chose to exile themselves to empty worlds rather than live among the species they had once hunted. Others became violent and had to be contained. But some, like Commander Zix-9, slowly began to change, working with former prisoners in the rehabilitation centers. They started to understand what they had done to the galaxy. More importantly, they began to learn what it meant to help rather than hurt. I don't understand, Zixon said to Dr. Roberts. During one of their sessions, we tried to kill you. We destroyed your cities and enslaved your people. Why are you helping us? Dr. Roberts looked at the former commander with patient eyes. Because that's what makes us different from you. We don't kill because we can. We protect because we must. The galaxy that emerged from the war was fundamentally different from the one that had existed before. The human Federation became the dominant power, but they ruled through cooperation rather than conquest. The freed species formed alliances. It's based on mutual defense rather than fear. The new galactic government was established on a simple principle: no species would ever again be allowed to prey on others. The humans had learned to be deadly hunters, but they chose to use that skill to protect rather than to conquer. Years passed and the changes became permanent. The Vorthech, who had successfully integrated into galactic society, served as protectors of the species they had once hunted. They knew better than Anyone what predators looked like and how to stop them. Commander Zixon, now calling himself by the human name, Alex, worked as a security coordinator for the refugee camps on Mars. His job was to protect the same species his people had. Once enslaved, it was fitting punishment. An unexpected redemption. I thought we were apex predators, he told a group of young humans who were studying galactic history. We didn't understand that true strength comes from protecting others, not hunting them. How the GT galaxy learned to live without fear for the first time in millennia. Trade flourished between species, scientific knowledge was shared freely, and conflicts were resolved through negotiation rather than violence. But the humans never forgot the lessons of the war. They maintained the most powerful military in the galaxy, ready to respond to any threat. They had learned that peace could only be preserved by those willing to fight for it. Admiral Clark, now retired but still serving as an advisor, spoke to new officers at the Earth Defense Academy. We became predators because we had to, he told them, but we chose to remain protectors because we wanted to. The academy was built on the ruins of New York City where the war had begun. It trained officers from dozens of species to defend the galaxy against any future threats. The motto carved above the entrance read, "Never again." The story of humanity's rise from prey to protector became legend throughout the galaxy. Children of every species learned how the humans had faced extinction and chosen to fight back. More importantly, they learned that the strongest predator was the one who chose to protect rather than hunt. Deep in space, automated monitoring stations watched for signs of new threats. The galaxy had learned that evil could come from anywhere at any time, but it had also learned that there were those willing to stand against it. The age of the Vorthach was over. Age of cooperation had begun, and watching over it all was a species that had learned the most important lesson of all. The strongest predator was the one who chose to protect the weak rather than hunt them. In the end, the aliens had been right about one thing: humans were apex predators. But they had been wrong about what that meant. The true apex predator was not the one who could kill the most, but the one who chose to save the most. The galaxy was safe, and humanity would make sure it stayed that way. They had learned to hunt, but they had chosen to protect, and that choice made all the difference. The stars were quiet again, but this time it was the quiet of peace rather than fear, and in that peace the galaxy thrived under the protection of those who had learned that the greatest strength came from using power to help rather than harm. The humans had won more than a war. They had won the right to define what it meant to be strong.